Welcome to the latest in our series of interviews with leading and influential people in the world of IP. My name is Gordon Harris from the Gowling WLG International IP Leadership Team. One of the big developments in the 30-odd years that I have been practicing has been the arrival and evolution of the legal press. Back in the 1980s, all you ever learned about other law firms was through gossip or the Law Society Gazette if they'd managed to get themselves into trouble. But from around 1990, we saw the arrival of publications like The Lawyer and Legal Week, combining some legal updates with industry news and increasingly directory-style rankings and awards. Then came more specific sector legal press, and in that category, the leading player in the world of IP was Managing Intellectual Property, known to us all as MIP. I'm delighted to welcome as my guest today the current managing editor of MIP, Ed Conlon. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Gordon. Good to be here.
Excellent. Well, let's get started, shall we? To kick us off, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your career to date and how you ended up in this pretty high-profile job.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started off in journalism, straight from university. Actually studied history, so don't actually have a legal background myself. So after my degree, it's just obviously, as many graduates do, looking around for a job, and kind of found myself applying for all kinds of things, really. And one of them just happened to be, something in business-to-business journalism for a legal publication. Probably at that stage didn't really know anything about B2B. I was only really familiar with newspapers. I had a sort of voicemail one day from someone called James Nerton, who is obviously well known to many people in IP, and had this voicemail asking me to go for an interview, and one thing led to another, and ended up working at managing IP sort of fresh out of university. Unfortunately, I was made redundant within about a year, so it was a bit of a kind of topsy-turvy start to my career, shall we say. So I moved across to World IP Review, which again I'm sure people are familiar with. Stayed there for several years. Eventually became editor there, and then at the start of last year moved across to managing IP again. So came back to where I'd started, as it were, but this time as managing editor, which was sort of a slight role reversal and a bit strange, but still still nice as well, to be fair. So
you didn't bear a grudge against them then?
Exactly, no, obviously not enough of a grudge to stop me coming back. So it was good. Came back a year and a half ago, still some of the same faces working there, funnily enough, as probably tends to happen in many companies. It's been a really good year and a half, and we've got a great team there, and it's been really good fun, 18 months, and enjoying the role.
Excellent. Well, let's plunge straight into the heart of all this then. I skated briefly over the sort of background of legal press at the beginning, but how do you see the place of a publication like MIP now? What do you see as the balance between providing legal knowledge, case updates, etc., and also legal news, mergers, senior appointments, and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably within the last 2 years, just before I joined, there was a really clear move in strategy and focus at MIP, actually. Lots of the legal press and the IP press do focus heavily on news. And that's great. But what I think was decided is that really it's not necessarily what people necessarily want to pay for. They want higher level, more useful and practical information. So really, I guess it's important to stress that we are a membership subscription-based provider, and some of the others are as well, absolutely, but not everyone. Our raison d'etre, I suppose, is to provide high quality, sort of predominantly in-house focused content, actually. Lots of our stories will feature quotes from plenty of in-house sources. There's still absolutely a room for private practice lawyers as well, because they have certain insight and expertise that the in-house counsel guys just don't have at all. But we do focus, I'd say, more heavily on the in-house counsel business side than some of the others. And we've made it our mission as well to focus on lots of judges. So lots of high-profile judge interviews in the last couple of years since I joined. Again, people may be familiar with these, but if not, we've we've not just interviewed people in the UK, but in Germany and France and the US as well. So there's been a real international flavour to those interviews, and so we really feel that this sort of the access to the sort of high profile in-house counsel judges and also private practice people is exactly what people want, really. You know, as I say, there is still absolutely room for expert analysis from law firms. They write plenty of great articles for us. I know Gowling, I think Matt Hervey's currently writing one for me on AI inventorship, in fact.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's just one of the examples. I think, you know, there's still room for you know, brief updates and news on appointments. People do want to hear that, and you know, we do include that for sure from time to time, including in our magazine, which you know, does have dedicated pages to appointments and to a bit of news. And we've recently started doing a feature called Day in the Life, which is a bit more of a light-hearted look at what just, you know, someone in IP would get up to on an average day. We start, you know, we've done a couple of those now, but to be brutally honest, the magazine is less of a priority these days. It really is. We are much more digital focused.
Oh, I was just going to come on to that, really, because I mean, I don't know, I've sort of don't subscribe to a newspaper anymore, or rather, I do subscribe to their website and look at things on there. And when I read MIP, I read it online. So, you know, in this increasingly digital world, what is the future for publications like yours? Are you planning any new platforms? Got any fancy AI projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think what you say there is shared by many people. I think, you know, it's the people who really like to read content just in print now are few and far between. I think, you know, we've been going towards a digital model in journalism for a long time, and I think people have always talked about, will print die out? And you know, it may never quite die out, but I don't think it's never ever going to be as prolific and prominent as it was. Let's face it. So, you know, with that in mind, as I said, we've reduced the focus on the magazine. We're only down to 4 issues now a year, but with that really strong focus on the website. So earlier this year, we relaunched our website and rebranded, which was a big project. It was you know, many months and many meetings, but we sort of got there in the end. I think in terms of our focus, apart from continuing, you know, to do what we're doing, really, we are adding new weapons to our armory, I would say. So we've started doing podcasts, which have been really popular. You know, the podcasts are great. I think they give people just a slightly different dimension, and it's nice. It's I guess a kind of mini version of a conference in a way, isn't it? You see those really interesting panel discussions at the conferences, and it's good to get 3 or 4 people just together. These days, it's not in a room, obviously. It's usually on a Zoom call or something like that. But, you know, just to talk about a particular issue, whether it's counterfeiting or FRAND or something like that. So that's something we're absolutely focusing on more and more.
Yeah, I'm a complete convert to podcasts. I mean, you know, you're walking between events or whatever, and you can just listen in, and they're normally of a manageable length. I think it's a terrific way of communicating, I must say, which, you know, we're looking to adopt ourselves, as you can see.
Well, absolutely. I totally agree. I think it's really good, and you know, I'm a big fan of the Economist podcast. I think they do them really well. Not sure if you listen to those or not, but
yes, I do. Yeah,
they've got some really good ones, and I think they set a good standard actually for B2B, you know, high quality content, you know, audio content. So yeah, we've got podcasts. I've started myself doing more opinion pieces to try and, again, just give a different dimension and give us a bit more of an identity, so it's a bit more personal. And you know, and I have to say, look, we're adding members and subscribers all the time, so I think people do like it. I don't think we've got any AI projects specifically. We're not quite there yet, perhaps. But you know, on our research and awards projects, some of those I think in the future will be data driven. So yeah, I mean, it's not quite AI, but there'll be more data.
Yeah, it's bordering onto it, isn't it? I mean, one of your recent opinion pieces has been on that topic, hasn't it? And one of my previous interviews has been with the woman who's the head of policy for AI at WIPO. So, we're all aware of how important it is. And Matt Harvey at our end is looking into all that as well, as you know. Now, This has been a funny old year in the IP world, because normally we're on and off aeroplanes and attending conferences. And one of the big roles of MIP historically has been to work at these conferences. You provide the daily updates, hosting events and whatever. Does the absence of these conferences represent an opportunity or a threat to you? How can you help fill the void that is left by these networking opportunities?
Yeah, look, I mean, you can't shy away from the fact that for any conference provider in any industry at the moment, it's incredibly difficult. Let's face it. It's the world's been turned on its head, and one of the big casualties of that, well, there've been many obvious casualties, unfortunately, but talking about business events has had to sort of cope with severe challenges, I would say. But look, despite that, I do feel that. I mean, I personally am not involved in the logistics as much as other people on my team are, but those guys on the team, who on MIP's team, they do a fantastic job. I mean, I was really kind of impressed by the speaker roster at our recent events. We've pulled together some great panels there. And it's still obviously something that people want to be involved in. And I think there's been great engagement as well, on the ones we've done already. I think people have been tuning in as many numbers as they had before, if not more. So, I think that's encouraging.
I think in terms of your own events, I can see that. And of course, your events tend to be quite, they are content driven. I mean, there is a nice networking angle over lunch or coffee, but when I come to one of your conferences, it's to go to the events, it's to listen to the talks, to listen to the sessions, or increasingly these days to moderate them as well. But what I'm thinking more of are things like Inter, where, to be honest, I mean, I don't go to that many of the working sessions. That's not why I go to Inter, or not why I go to APAA or anything like that. It's to mix and mingle, and that's gone for the time being. So can you help us fill that gap?
Yeah, look, I mean, we obviously, we're never going to be on the same, when it comes to events, we're never going to be on the same scale as Inter or AIPPI or someone like that. But, they have a very specific role, which is to bring often thousands of people together. And, I do completely accept that there is a void there. I suppose there are a couple of things to say. The first one is that because of our in-house focus over the last 2 years, we have built up a huge number of contacts, to be quite honest. The team really, they really have done a brilliant job on that. And what that means is that when we don't have these networking opportunities at places like Inter, for us, we're in a stronger position than others, I would say, because we've already got so many good contacts and we already speak to them on a regular basis. So it does soften the blow to some degree. And I think that is a positive. I mean, the other thing to say is that, obviously with these conferences, they are still available online. Usually, you can watch them live, and I mean, it's not quite the same, but you can at least still be sending in questions via the Q&A. You can do networking on the platforms that we use on MIP, whether or not Inter will use the same. I mean, I'm sure they probably will.
Yeah.
But it is possible. Okay, it's never going to quite be the same, but it is possible to network if you want. So yeah, look, there are opportunities there. What I think will be interesting to see is how someone like Inter goes about the virtual conference, because if they can do a really good job, then it will be interesting to see whether or not that model stays in future.
Yeah.
So
I do wonder, I must say, although I think people do like to get together, and I'm sure that conferences will go forward, but I wonder if there'll be a reduction in the number of them. I think I once said that a really well-organized IP lawyer could probably get on a plane on about the 1st of January and be going from conference to conference for the entire year.
Yeah.
Now, I think I expect to see a reduction in that. I just think that a whole host of factors, environmental and other things, will intervene there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think for us, we'll go back to physical conferences whenever we can, obviously, but I'm sure for many conference providers, the future quite possibly will be some sort of hybrid, you know.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see how things go, I think.
So I know you're in touch, as you said yourself, with the big players in the IP world, whether it's judges or senior GCs or whatever. What are you picking up from them at the moment about their plans and concerns, and are there any trends emerging? I mean, do you think the IP world is coping well with COVID-19 or badly?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, you know, the issues that people raise tend to be very industry and location and sort of IP discipline specific, don't they? I mean, what someone in a FRAN specialist in Germany, you know, the issues they face will be very different to, say, an anti-counterfeiting specialist in China or somewhere. So, you know, there's a huge variety, which is actually why I do find the issue of IP very interesting, because you know, you move between these different topics very easily and very quickly. So that's great. I'd say on the in-house side, the one thing that has come up unsurprisingly is budget. You know, there's a big question about, you know, are budgets being cut, you know, and if so, by how much, et cetera, et cetera. As far as I can see, to be honest, budgets have been, I think, largely unscathed. Now, I mean, I know that some people have had them cut. I'm not denying that, but I don't feel like there's been a mass cull of budgets. And that certainly came out in a survey we did, and I think on one of the recent panels at the conferences as well, actually, this week. So I think there are positives there for in-house for sure. And obviously, you know, anything to do with budget affects private practice lawyers as well, of course. So, you know, it's a sort of trickle down effect, but I think
I moderated that session, and some of the interesting stuff that came out of it was that obviously the kind of cost cutting that you might do in an in-house IP department is something that may not actually be visible for a little while to come. So it's not, you know, it's not really that immediately helpful. But I did get the sense that whilst companies did not wish to reduce the new registrations, whether they were brands or patents or whatever, because that's the lifeblood of the business going forward, they were taking something of a more critical look at some of their more historical rights, though, and I think some things are being abandoned to save the annual costs, which you know will have its own impacts.
I mean, look, that I guess that makes sense. You know, businesses are going to have to sort of prune and trim, aren't they, and be a bit more careful in what they're protecting, etc., which I guess is understandable. But I mean, at least there doesn't seem to be a sort of mass sort of axe taken to the budgets, which is good. I think I mean,
you know, I think the IP world, certainly the impression we get is that there is a lot of IP activity still happening, that people are taking steps to protect their rights, and perhaps almost more fervently. So historically, we've seen sometimes the IP activity rather counter-cyclically has gone up in recessions, with people keener to protect their business.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'm sure that has happened, hasn't it? You know, it's often people prevail in these very challenging circumstances, don't they? And it does force people to adapt. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I think just on the question as well, I think in terms of law firms, I mean, look, you'll obviously know this better than me, but my sense is that some of the big issues right now are actually a bit more about law firm management, thinking specifically office space and working from home and things like that. I think, you know, as we discussed recently, working from home absolutely works for some people. It can even work for firms. I think, you know, you said it's been very positive for your firm. So I think that's definitely a big issue at the moment for law firms, in my opinion. You know, I'm a big fan of the working from home setup. I think lots of companies have shown that it's possible. So, you know, why not keep it going if that's what companies want to do? So that's been a positive. But I'd say I would say on the whole, I do feel like the IP world has actually done very well in COVID. I know that there are lots of different elements to the IP world, you know, firms, companies, IP offices, etc. But again, my sense is that there probably has been, they've coped surprisingly well, I would say. I haven't heard any sort of horror stories. So I think that's great. And I sort of feel like, you know, COVID's a bit like Brexit, really, isn't it? it's the sort of talking point on everyone's lips all the
In so
time
many ways, yeah.
in many ways. But unfortunately, that is the way. But I feel that most people within the law have probably come to terms, I would say, with Brexit now, and finding ways to sort of get through it. Probably begrudgingly in many circumstances.
Well, the thing about lawyers is this, in the event of the sort of global nuclear holocaust, a lawyer will be one of the first people to crawl out from under a stone, with something to do when it's over. Exactly. Lawyers are very good at survival, and turning things to account. So, I think Brexit produces as many opportunities as it does threats in terms of the change. Change is always good for lawyers, in almost any form. We love changes in the law, obviously, when that happens. So
yeah,
just touch on another topic, if I may now. One of the things that I know MIP was great on, and historically, is it was one of the first countries to pay magazines to pay serious attention to China. And you organized an event in China, and everything pointing towards the increasing opening up of the Chinese market to the world. MIP was to the fore. But right now, you wonder if that's going to a stall. Now, I mean, obviously, we're talking here before the American election. The people watching this, the American election may have happened, and that may change things. But right now, are you seeing any worrying trends coming out of that part of the world?
If to be honest and frank, I feel like the issues that come from China are often the same ones that have been there for some time. Counterfeiting, trade secret theft. There's no getting away from those kind of connotations when it comes to China. So I'm sure they are worrying to lawyers and counsel for sure, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily new. What I find interesting about China, and actually think is really important, is that it should be viewed in context. And I think there's a lot of nuance that needs to be applied to China because, let's face it, that it's a huge country with a massive population, and its economy is still in a sort of very different stage to other countries around the world that have more developed IP systems. And I would say it's actually come quite a long way in a fairly short space of time. And look, there are obviously big issues there, but I have to say there's been a lot of positive action that I've seen in the last few years from the courts and also from the IP offices, to be fair to China. But as we know, look, there's always going to be that big obvious challenge of political influence, for example. The courts may be viewed positively, I don't know, but there's always going to be the political influence there, which you can't get away from. And as I say, you're always going to have a vast economy, huge numbers of people to try and educate about IP. It's very difficult. But I mean, look, when it comes to outside views of China, I guess I wonder sometimes whether or not it comes down to people just not really understanding how to do business there. I mean, I'm not saying I can because I've never done business in China.
No.
But I wonder.
I think that's a really good point, actually. A really good point. I think, people are slow to pick up on the cultural differences, and that can cause confusion.
Yeah.
So, immerse yourself in it. Yeah.
How have you found? I mean, how's Gowling found doing business out there?
Well, we've been out there for a long time now. We've had the office there for getting up for 12 years. And I think, we're really settled into it and completely comfortable working in the Chinese environment. And our team out there are predominantly local Chinese lawyers and staff generally. So, I think all of those things have kind of been overcome. I think the concern at the moment is whether or not the political tension that is developing is going to stall the progress a little bit and make it slightly more difficult to interact. Whereas up to now, I just saw things opening up and it getting easier and easier, and China becoming more innovative and, recognizing IP rights, enforcing overseas IP rights, everything going in the right direction. But then you have someone shouting at them from over the seas saying, you're to blame for this, you're to blame for that. And you can watch, something in the mentality in China sort of closing up a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
There may be a slowing down of that openness, but we will see, won't we? We'll see.
And sort of how have you found I know that there's been, I think it was Tom Duke that you spoke very highly of, the IP attacker out there, and I know that he's not in that role anymore, but would you say that the UK network has been good out there?
Yeah, it's a great initiative that was taken up by the Foreign Office to put somebody down in that position, to really liaise, and he developed relationships in China and knew the right people to talk to, and actually helped. I would say, I can't give any detail, but actually helped with client matters. When we had a client who was interested in doing something and wasn't quite sure how to do it, Tom was able to help and to sort of point people in the right direction. So it was a great initiative. Now, and this very interesting turning of the tables there. If you remember my initial email to you about this, which I called this the bite a bit. So it was the interviewer getting interviewed, and you've turned it on me. You've turned it back.
Right.
So you're going to retake the initiative here. Now, you said at the outset that you're not legally qualified yourself. So you look at the outside, you look at the legal world from the outside in many ways. First of all, because you're a journalist and looking at it, but also you're not kind of, you don't have all the sort of prejudices that are built into lawyers. So what issues are standing out to you at the moment where you think maybe the legal world is perhaps being a little bit slow to move, a little bit slow to recognize change?
So there are a couple of things I would say, and I think number one is that, and it's probably not a surprise to anyone out there, but I do think that education when it comes to IP, and I'm talking about educating non-specialists here, is, I would say, quite poor. In the UK, at least, if we just talk about the UK, just as one example, it doesn't seem to me like IP is taken seriously enough at government level. I know that we have an IP minister, but it's not.
We've had many in recent years.
Exactly, which is exactly part of the problem, I think. They come and go. It's a revolving door. It doesn't really help anyone. It doesn't really give a good indication that IP has been taken seriously. And I guess it's surprising because, obviously we would say this, but I think it is fair to say that IP is integral to many businesses, right? So it shouldn't come as a surprise, but for whatever reason, it hasn't been taken seriously. So I think that is an issue, at least in the UK. I'm sure it is probably an issue in other countries as well. So I think what that then means is that it falls to the specialists, whether they like it or not, to become the educators, to explain why IP is important. And I don't think that should be done just within their companies and within their industries, but also externally as well. And I'm sure, there are lots of good examples of people doing great jobs trying to influence government and trying to raise the profile of IP within their companies. But I suppose from my perspective, I do see this issue of IP value coming up time and time again. So it just makes me wonder, are we making enough progress on that? Because I suppose it's all well and good standing up at Inter every single year talking about how amazing IP is and how much value it brings to brands, which I'm not disputing, but I just wonder if the same message is coming out time and time again, are we making progress on this necessarily? It's hard to say, but I would say probably not enough.
No, I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, we did a survey earlier in the year at C-suite level, and there's an awareness of IP, but it's still not being treated as with the respect that you would expect something of that value. It's not as high on the agenda as it should be. So perhaps we can all contribute a bit in that regard. You said yourself you have a focus on in-house counsel and in-house teams. So, maybe moves on to my next question really, which is how can lawyers, wherever they are, whether they're in-house or in private practice, how can they work with you to move things forward for the legal profession generally, but specifically in IP? So what do we do that's helpful? And conversely, what do we do that's unhelpful?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great. First of all, it's great when anyone works with us. We're always keen to hear from new faces and speak to new people, whether it's on the editorial side or the conference side or anything else. But I think based on what I said, we're not really a news provider. We like to provide analysis and insight that's actually going to be useful for people. And I suppose so. Therefore, when we're working with people, what we want really is honest, practical advice, because what we don't want and what other people don't really want is just a summary of an event. There's no point in me talking to someone about a case for that person just to relay to me the facts that I already know and that probably other people are just going to know. So it's much more useful, I would say, to actually say in simple terms, like, this is what this means, and this is what it's going to change. This is the impact, etc. So I think that's what we're looking for, and I think foresight of future trends is great as well. It's always great to hear, where do you think this is going to go in the next 5 years? What's an IP law firm going to look like in the next 10 years? Like, where do you see these things going? That's always great for sure, because it helps people to really think about these things and potentially plan as well. So, I think the core ethos really is that if we can get the best information from everyone and tell everyone else why they need to know about it and why it's important, then it would hopefully raise the standards overall, as you say. So that's why it's important. On a practical level, just a sort of nitty-gritty day-to-day level, I understand why people like to check quotes for sure, but it can be a little frustrating sometimes. I'm not going to lie, because it can delay things sometimes. But look, I don't think we have any major issues with that. I think the big one, and actually I think this ties into the sort of mindset sometimes in IP of having that slightly traditional old school approach to, sorry, my phone's just ringing, I'm just going to turn that off. Bad time. Yeah. It comes back to this sort of slightly traditional old school way of looking at things, which is, people who are not subscribers will always say to us, can you send me a PDF of this story? And we say to them, look, we can't. We're a subscription service. If you're not a subscriber, that's fine. Just take a free trial. But we can't just give away our content for free on PDFs. We have no control over that. We don't know where it's being shared. And I do just sense this reluctance sometimes. I mean, I know you mentioned at the start you read online, which is great, and I'm sure other people do. But I think there still is this kind of mindset to be reading PDFs and reading and doing things in a slightly old school way. And I mean, that's fine to a degree, but I just think, that's not necessarily where the future's going, let's face it. So I think,
no, indeed. Yeah.
We're not here just to be, because at the end of the day, the reason we're a subscription and paid for membership is because we're providing what we would argue is kind of really, really good access to sort of high profile people with really, really good content. And if we give it away, why would anyone?
Well, quite. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a challenge, but as I say, it's something to work on.
Just a couple of points more. IP sets quite a lot of store by its awards and its rankings and IP stars and all of that. Now, your approach is different to some of the other directory magazines, Legal Week, Legal Business, people like this, in that you don't appear to place too much emphasis on financial performance. I wonder if it's deliberate. I mean, obviously you've taken great steps to maintain the separation between the editorial and the awards ranking side of things, which is good. But is it a deliberate ploy not to get too submerged in financial success of law firms?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is actually. The first thing to say, as you mentioned, is that, and I completely get that not everyone would understand or be aware of this, but at MIP, there is a separation of powers between the editorial, which I run, the events which we produce, and also our awards and research and rankings, right? So they're the three strands. Now, I guess they're separated for obvious reasons, like, to avoid conflict of interest, etc. But that is an important point. But we are interdependent. We link together nicely. Of course, we publish stories about our conferences on our website, for example. So there's a lot of crossover. But when it comes, I did actually speak to the guys who are a bit more specialist in awards and research about this, because, I wanted to make sure I gave a kind of accurate answer. But the reason I think that we don't look at financial performance so much is because it wouldn't be fair on the smaller companies, I think, who don't necessarily make as much revenue, because I don't think success is just down to revenue. So that, as everyone will know, anyone who's been to our awards or follows the research will know, you know, there are lots of criteria involved in determining who should win a certain award or be given a certain position in the research and ranking. So, you know, often I suppose fundamentally it comes down to the quality of the work and the impact they're having on clients, because, you know, if a sort of smaller firm has won a really big case at the Supreme Court, for example, but they don't happen to make as much money as a so-called bigger firm, I mean, why should that count against them?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why we as a firm particularly value winning one of your awards, because you do get the real feeling that it's about quality and not just about financial success.
Yeah.
Ed, if you parting shot, I'm going to open the floor to you now. If you see a lot of people, you've had a bit of experience now in the IP community in different jobs, but in particularly over the last 18 months in this job. If you had one key message for the IP community, whether it's lawyers, patent attorneys, in-house IP counsel, or all of them, what would it be?
It's a tough one, that. Look, I suppose from a sort of slightly selfish, self-promotional point of view, I'd say, you know, please get engaged with MIP. You know, we feel that we can help you do your jobs better if you do engage with us, obviously. From a wider perspective, I would probably say, would go back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is, I think it's important for IP lawyers to really get out of their comfort zone, to really try and spread the word about IP and why it's important, and try not to exist in a sort of echo chamber. You know, you don't need to preach to the converted about how good IP is. Like, try and really get out there and tell other people who don't know about IP about why it's so good and why it's important. So I think that to me is a really obvious thing that needs to change, I would say. So yeah, I mean, that's the challenge for IP lawyers, I think.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, that's great. Thank you ever so much for being my guest today. At one point, there was a real danger that you were going to turn around and interview me, but I'm pleased to say we got that back on track again.
Never keep the journalists down, I suppose.
I realised that. But thanks ever so much indeed. I wish you and MIP great continued success. Look forward to following the IP world with you in years to come. Thanks very much indeed, Ed.
Thanks, Gordon. Appreciate it. Thank you. Cheers.